I think the biggest struggle I've ever had is depression. I grew up with a mom who was depressed and a dad who was bipolar. My next step was to lose my job. I had been on staff for 4.5 years to a large church, a church of well over 1,000. You hit a wall. And in ministry, a lot of people hit the wall and they get off the course. My story started in May of 1989. I was a seminary student at Columbia Bible College. In seminary, I was working on my Master of Divinity. And there was a guy in one of my classes who was a pastor of a local church, and yet we were in the same classes, and it intrigued me. So I was working at UPS moving boxes, and I thought, you know, I ought to look for a job. So there was an opening, a position at a local Southern Baptist church for a youth pastor. I got hired instantly. It was a church of about 100 and a youth of about 20. So I'm in this perfect environment. You know, everybody around me is a Christian. They're growing in their faith. You know, they're going to go into ministry. They love the Lord. And I'm in a church environment where it was about the exact opposite of that. I was in my 20s, and so I'm trying to reach students on their level. So I'm bringing in all these ideas, and instead of championing those ideas and saying, wow, that's great, you're trying new approaches to reach your students, he would talk me down in front of the staff and say, what are you doing? You know, I'm getting all these complaints. And I would talk to some of the other staff, and they were like, wow, how do you put up with that? I mean, that's just so difficult to have somebody, your lead pastor, you know, talking you down in front of the other staff. And I didn't really think about it at the time, but the more I thought about it afterwards, over the next several weeks and months, it really started to dig into me. My first experience at ministry was I felt very wounded. And what happened after that, the result of that was I felt so wounded, I left ministry for several years. I wasn't even in ministry. In fact, I felt disqualified from ministry in some way because my senior pastor had given me an idea that I wasn't good enough to be in ministry. Later, many years later, I was in the opposite position. And I was a lead pastor, and I hired a youth pastor, a student pastor. And it was really cool because at the time, we had the kind of relationship that I had wanted to have when I was starting out in ministry. And but it gave me the opportunity to learn from my experience where I wasn't given the support and the encouragement, but I could give it to this young man who was starting out in ministry. And so it was kind of, you know, if you learn from the hurt, if you don't get so focused on the hurt and let it control you, if you move on from it, it can just have a really powerful impact in your life. Instead of me just, you know, going on staff at another church, I need to minister to guys. I need to help them to be healthy. And so that started the process that today is H2 Ministry. And I think about the prize of the upward call of God. You know, we have a call, and I don't know what our prize is. But you don't get the prize unless you finish the race. You know, last year I was in a 10K. My favorite race is the Peachtree Road Race in Atlanta. It's on July 4th. There's usually 50 to 60,000 people that run it. I've run it, this year will be my 9th. Every runner knows there's a wall, especially if you run a 10K marathon, half marathon, anything that's several miles. When we feel like giving up, that's when we need to stay in the race. When we want to run, that's when God says, you're leaving the race, you're leaving the track. Don't leave the track. When people wound you, you forgive them. You just accept the fact that we live in a fallen world and people do some mean things to people. But you never let them question the call, because that call comes from God. It doesn't come from man. The opinions of people kind of come and go depending on how well things are going at church, but God's opinion never changes. And He loves me and He thinks I'm great. And the same is true for every pastor in ministry, is that they're great and that God loves them and has a plan. And what they're doing is unbelievably important because they're changing people's eternities.